I think antidepressants are giving people false hope, and a lot of people may feel better initially, but actually there will come a point when they realise, I've had the treatment that's supposed to work, it's not working for me, what on earth am I going to do? And that can put people in an even worse place. There are real problems out there in society that make people feel stressed and anxious and unhappy. And I think actually the people who are saying it's in your brain are the people who are making it less likely that we're going to resolve the problems that are making people unhappy and distressed and anxious in the first place.
My guest this week is Joanna Moncrieff. Now, Joanna is a psychiatrist and is perhaps the leading skeptical voice in the use of antidepressants to treat depression. She has written widely and she's appeared on a lot of media, and she's a controversial figure, and her latest book is called Chemically Imbalanced: The Making and Unmaking of the Serotonin Myth. Joanna, how would you change the world?
I would radically demedicalize our understanding and treatment of mental health problems. I think that understanding things like depression, anxiety, ADHD, etc., as if they are medical problems that arise from the brain, is harmful to the individuals themselves. I don't think it leads to good outcomes. And I think it's harmful to society because it distracts our attention from what is actually making people unhappy and stressed in the first place. And so I would relocate help for people with mental health problems out of medical facilities, out of GP surgeries, probably to somewhere like social services, where they wouldn't be treated for their diagnosis, for their label, but actually helped to deal with the problems that had made them unhappy or anxious or stressed in the first place.
So you're not talking about just replacing drugs with therapy. You're talking about tackling the underlying causes of depression.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I do think therapy is helpful for some people in some situations, but I don't think it's a panacea. And I think the main problem is that we think of people who are depressed as having this thing called depression, and we treat the depression rather than helping the individual with their individual difficulties.
I mean, there are between 8 and 9 million people, we think, being treated for depression with antidepressants in Britain at the moment. And it's thought to be a growing diagnosis. Post-pandemic, big increase in mental health treatment. And what you're saying is there's nothing biologically wrong?
Yes, I am saying that we haven't found evidence that there is a biological process that causes this condition, if we want to call it a condition.
What is the serotonin myth that you think you're correcting?
One of the biological theories of depression that was proposed several decades back now was the idea that depression is due to a deficiency of certain brain chemicals. And serotonin was one of the brain chemicals that was suggested to be relevant in depression in particular. So this is referred to as the serotonin theory of depression. It was articulated by medical researchers back in the 1960s. There was a big project to try and detect abnormalities in serotonin and other brain chemicals that were proposed in the 1970s and 80s. They didn't find anything. The theory sort of fell out of favor in the 1980s, but then it was recruited by the pharmaceutical industry when they released the SSRIs in the late 1980s and early 1990s to help to market that range of drugs. And that's when this idea that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance became really widely known by the general public and featured in advertisements and on pharmaceutical industry websites and that sort of thing.
That is not an explanation that is used now for depression or for prescribing SSRIs, but you're saying that's still a common misunderstanding.
Well, I think the question has to be if antidepressants are not correcting a serotonin deficiency or some other chemical imbalance, as they were initially said to be doing, then what are they doing?
That's a slightly different question. I mean, what I'm trying to tackle and to get at into what you think is wrong with the way things are prescribed at the moment is, do you think people who go on to antidepressants still think that this is the reason? And what's your evidence for that?
I think there's an assumption by the medical profession as well as by patients that antidepressants work by targeting some underlying biological abnormality. And yet that has not been demonstrated. And there is another way that antidepressants work, which is not presented to patients and not widely acknowledged.
So, I mean, are you saying that SSRIs are a bit like alcohol?
Absolutely.
They change the way you feel.
Absolutely. Antidepressants are mind-altering, brain and mind-altering drugs like alcohol, like cannabis, etc. That doesn't mean that the effects that they produce are exactly the same as the effects that alcohol produces, but in principle, they do the same thing. They change our mental states quite subtly in the case of many antidepressants, but nevertheless, they do produce these changes, particularly this characteristic emotional numbing.
Isn't there something bigger here, though, about our whole approach to medicine, which is that too many people think that scientists really understand how medicines work. You know, we've got very used to just taking pills to make things better. And the truth is that a lot of it is just trial and error. We don't really know.
Yeah, I do think we put far too much faith.
We didn't know how penicillin worked for decades.
I think we can put too much faith in medical pronouncements or the pronouncements of medical research or neuroscience findings, and those can be overinterpreted. But I think that taking something, for example, for pain, people often cite the fact that we don't know exactly how paracetamol works, is different from taking something that is changing your mental state, like alcohol, as you say, and therefore changing your thoughts and feelings by changing your brain chemistry. We do that, like you say, we do it with alcohol. We recognize that, you know, if you take a lot of alcohol, you'll probably temporarily feel better, feel less depressed or less anxious. But we don't regard that as a sensible long-term solution to feeling low or fearful or something like that. And so I think that way that antidepressants are working, that those effects that they have need to be clearly explained to people so that they can make properly informed decisions about whether they want to take brain and mind-altering substances to address their emotional problems.
So you think there is no use for antidepressants, is that right?
So I think that the evidence base for antidepressants shows that they are probably not beneficial. They are minimally different from a placebo, and that difference is probably explained by the fact that people in these randomized controlled trials who are meant to not know whether they get the placebo or the antidepressant probably do know in a lot of cases, and that gives them that gives the people who are taking the antidepressant an amplified placebo effect. So I think that's probably what explains the small difference between antidepressants and placebo, but it's very small anyway.
I mean, just to be clear on that, the evidence is that there is an improved outcome for people on antidepressants, isn't there?
There's a slight difference.
It's better than if you're just on a placebo.
It's slightly better.
Yes,
overall,
and your hypothesis is that people somehow know. I mean, what's that based on?
So there are trials where people have asked the participants to guess whether they're taking the antidepressant or the placebo. In most of those, not all, but in most of those, people can guess more accurately than would be predicted by chance what they're taking. And then we also know from some studies that what you guess you're taking has really quite a strong impact on outcome. It can improve your depression scores by quite a bit more than the difference between the drug and the placebo.
Isn't there a bit of a problem with surmising that because people are correctly guessing that they're on the drug rather than the placebo, that the drug doesn't work? You know, they are probably guessing that because they're feeling better.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's been proposed by people. The trouble is it's also been shown in negative trials where there's no difference between the drug and placebo, that people who guess they're on the active drug do better than people who guess they're on the placebo, regardless of what they're actually taking. But
I mean, I suppose that the summary position for you is that you don't think that the medical trial outcome, which shows that people are better off taking antidepressants than not, is sufficiently good for it to be scientifically sound.
I don't think that it justifies the mass prescribing of antidepressants. But another really important point is that we've assumed that what antidepressants are doing is correcting some underlying biological process that leads to the symptoms of depression. We don't have evidence of that. That's large. That was the paper that I did on the serotonin hypothesis was what sparked me writing the book. And there's another way that antidepressants might be working or might be having their effects when people take them for depression, and that is that they're not inert. They are drugs that change our normal brain chemistry, and by doing so, change our normal mental states, our normal feelings, thought processes, etc.
This is your brain when you're strong.
Not massively strong drugs in this respect, most of the antidepressants that we use nowadays, but they do induce feelings of emotional numbing. They numb people's positive and negative emotions, and they have been shown to do this in volunteers as well as people with depression. And of course, if you give people with depression a drug that numbs them a bit, that may be what's reducing their depression scores compared to placebo, as well as this amplified placebo effect. So I'm not saying that, so it's possible that it might be that effect too. But I think that the decisions that people make about whether they want to take a drug for depression, if it's presented to them as something that changes their normal brain chemistry and their normal mental states, will be different from if it's presented to them as something that's going to target and correct some underlying abnormality.
Because one of the criticisms around your work is that you've created a straw man, an imaginary myth, which is this explanation around brain chemistry. When if you go on the NHS website or if you look up any of the charity websites, they're pretty clear. They don't actually say that. They don't say there's a problem with your serotonin, therefore go on one of the many common antidepressants that people know about.
So lots and lots of medical websites have told people that there's a problem in their brain chemistry historically. They have started to correct that over the last few years, some have corrected it since we published the paper on serotonin and depression. But the thing is, if you don't tell people this other explanation, that these drugs are altering your brain chemistry and thereby altering your normal mental states, then people will assume, I think, particularly after all the promotion that's come from the pharmaceutical industry, persuading people that depression was a chemical imbalance, that the drugs are targeting some underlying abnormality. So they're being fixed. So I think, yes, exactly. So I think that unless people are explicitly told that, no, we don't have evidence that this is what the drugs are doing, then that's what they will assume that they are doing.
I mean, at the moment, antidepressants are doled out very, very easily by GPs who are not psychiatrists. How have we got into that situation?
Well, that's a really good question. I think there are a number of factors. I mean, the first is that the pharmaceutical industry has promoted antidepressants very heavily since the release of SSRIs in the early 1990s. There's GPs and psychiatrists have been deluged with advertising and promotional material. So that's one of the reasons. I think that another reason is that doctors want to be able to help people. And, what does a doctor usually do? They give you a pill, they give you a prescription. And psychiatrists in particular want to feel that they have a medical solution for a common mental health complaint, that is depression. And people themselves have of course, the idea that you could get rid of, of really troubling feelings with a pill is appealing. And so people have also been persuaded by that message that originally came from the pharmaceutical industry, because actually prior to the pharmaceutical industry's really strong campaigns of the 1990s, people were reluctant to take medication for depression, and they didn't see it.
Because it was really scary medication, lithium and that kind of thing.
Well, it was partly because the benzodiazepines were so widely prescribed at that time, and it was becoming clear that they were dependence-inducing. So it was partly because of fears about dependence, but also people, I think, just felt that actually dealing with emotional problems with drugs wasn't the right route, and that depression was something that was a reaction to life circumstances, and so there should be other ways to deal with it.
I mean, patients ask for SSRIs now, don't they? People they don't go to the doctor and say, "Can I? What can I do?" They'll say, "I think I need to take antidepressants." What should doctors be doing in that situation?
So I think there are some patients that come to doctors like that, but I think there are also many patients that come to doctors and are not sure really whether they should be taking a drug or not. And so I do think